Welcome to the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. I'm the Doc, John Macaroon. Christian Boer is here as well. Lots to get into, even though it's now considered the offseason. 5 to 6 weeks of a break for the Detroit Lions, the front office, the football team, the players get away. Look, the NFL world still keeps rolling along. And so we'll be here to track all the news, track all the insights going on across the league, as well as kind of recapping everything that's happened with the Detroit Lions as we now prepare for a massive training camp. It's a big deal, Christian. You know it, how important it is for the Detroit Lions to have a good training camp, to have a great opportunity to kick off the year. And you're going to get a good early look at the Lions because they're going to play on July 31st. The Detroit Lions are going to take the football field in Canton, Ohio. We'll be there to watch and see the early performance of the Detroit Lions. But some early news was made this week, and it's wild too because the football world does not stop when OTAs or mandatory minicamps stop. For the Detroit Lions, there's no mandatory minicamp. They had their 2 weeks of OTAs, and now they're on a break. But the Packers, they made some news. They made news early on Monday morning when it was reported that Jaire Alexander has probably reached a decision with the organization so that he can be released, so that he can have an opportunity to select where he's going to go next. And just some early reading from the reports, they tried to work out a trade, but I think most NFL teams figured out, okay, that they don't want to take on the compensation for a player that's been dealing with a lot of injuries. And most notably, teams definitely want the leverage on their side. So force the hand of the Packers, who have probably now made the decision. It's time to part ways with Jaire Alexander. So naturally, we take a look at, as well as with a lot of players, not each and every free agent that's available, but it's interesting to always look at how a team can upgrade and also maybe even gain information from a division rival. But from your assessment and the article that you wrote for Detroit Lions on SI, should the Detroit Lions take a look seriously at bringing in Jaire Alexander? I know there's probably equal pros and cons. Makes it a tough decision.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing with Jaire Alexander is the durability has become a major issue. It's not just like a 1 year fluky type of thing. He's only played in 14 games combined over the last 2 seasons, 7 games apiece. So he's spending a lot of time on the sideline with these injuries that have really bothered him over the past several seasons. And when he's at his best, he's still a really good player. And I think that you saw that a little bit in the 7 games he was able to suit up in last year. You know, he does still have talent. He can still cover the best of them. And so for that reason, I do think the Lions should at least take the temperature of the situation and figure out, okay, what kind of deal is Jaire Alexander looking for? Is it a prove-it deal? Does he want to get something with some stability where maybe it's a multi-year contract? Because a talented player like him is probably going to get that from a team that's desperate for cornerback help. And I don't think the Lions are necessarily desperate for cornerback help. And I do think that they want to see what they have in these guys that they drafted last year, Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw. So right now, I think it's a right price. And on a 1 year deal, absolutely. Why would you not kick the tires on that? But I do think anything from a long-term perspective or anything that gets out of a price range that they're comfortable with, I think that the Lions would pass.
Well, one of the things that supporters who visit at Detroit Podcast will say is not a locker room guy. They've
Yeah.
selected some quotes that he said, kind of making it seem like he's a little bit more of a me first type of guy, maybe when he senses. And that's what, a lot of fans and it's realistic. It's, you don't want to upset the apple cart with players that come in that can disrupt the vibe of a locker room. But I still think the Lions locker room is pretty tight with veteran leadership that won't let one player be disruptive. And again, do you really think a player is going to come in and disrespect Dan Campbell's locker room? I feel like they get sent right to the office and then it's taken care of. It's not like the Lions are going to sit there and hang on to a guy that's disruptive. It's like, okay, we bring you in if it's a prove it deal or bring you in on a contract that's team friendly. If it doesn't work out, they quickly move on. Similarly with CJ Gardner-Johnson, with Cam Sutton, it was a situation they wanted to see what the talent would be like, and it didn't work out. And then they were eventually gone. And so for Jaire Alexander, if the opportunity fits, I do think that he can come in and if he can stay healthy, can produce, right? What were his numbers like the last couple of years, even though, yes, they were shortened by some injury-plagued seasons?
Yeah, I believe he had 2 interceptions and 7 passes defensed in 7 games last year. I think the biggest thing for him was he was still grading out at that high 70s in terms of the Pro Football Focus defensive and coverage ratings. He held opposing quarterbacks to a passer rating under 80 on passes thrown his way, and the completion percentage in his direction was right around 56%. So I do think that, like I said, there's still something left in the tank with him. And as far as the cultural aspect of it, in terms of him fitting in the locker room, yes, I know the stunt that he did where he went out for the coin toss and called the coin toss and almost caused a big problem despite not even being recognized as a captain. Obviously that's not going to fly in Detroit. But I also think that there is enough stability with guys who have been in the organization under Dan Campbell long enough, with the Jared Goffs of the world, the St. Browns, the Sewells. That stuff doesn't happen in the Lions locker room because you've got strong veteran leaders that you can trust that are not going to let that fly around in Detroit. So, I do think that obviously the whole persona that he kind of has is something where when you look at it initially, you're like, no, like that wouldn't fit in Detroit. But also, if you're the Lions and you can trust your veteran leaders, then maybe you take a chance on somebody like that, knowing that that your standard is going to be enforced. And so I'm not necessarily of the ilk that would be like the biggest deal breaker, just because I think the Lions should be able to trust their veteran leaders to kind of enforce the standard by now. But yeah, very productive player when healthy, but the when healthy part of it is a huge aspect of this argument. And that's why I'm not going outside of the established boundaries in terms of financials or length of the deal to try and get something done. Plus, like I said, you want to figure out what you have in Arnold and Rakestraw, and the best way to do that is to let them play.
Yeah, look, I know people don't like the word, hey, players coming in blocking the development, but hey, competition can only make you better.
Correct.
And I do think that there's secrets that Jaire Alexander can share about playing in the division. Even looking at, hey, how did the Packers kind of defend the Detroit Lions? There's always value in some information there that can be given. So it's interesting. I do not think it's going to happen. I do see the likes of maybe the 49ers or the Dolphins, teams that are maybe the Falcons that are in need of some cornerback help, maybe making a bigger push and making a bigger financial offer. So I do think that it's going to be a tough hill to climb. But hey, if the numbers match up, if the Lions are interested seriously and they can manage it, if it's a reasonable cap hit for this year, we're going to talk a little bit later about a challenge that is upcoming for the Detroit Lions. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I'm not yet quick to dismiss the idea that the Lions could sign Jaire Alexander. Now, before we get into, recapping OTAs, your overall assessment of the couple weeks that we got a chance to evaluate, I do want to kind of take a step back and a global look at the Detroit Lions. So you've had a chance now over the last 5.5 months, 6 months now, to evaluate the moves that were made, signings that were made to address sudden retirements, guys that are dealing with situations like Frank Ragnow, who don't want to play football anymore. They want to end their career. So the Lions are forced to bring in more talent. You've looked at the moves that were made in terms of depth and some of the smaller moves in terms of players at the lower end of the roster. So I want to ask at this point in time, because next week we are going to address how the football team maybe needs to get better. And we'll start to take a look at finer points and a deeper level over the course of the next several weeks before we get into training camp in late July. But I do want to ask, from your assessment, where is this football team better than they were last year? We're not talking about coaching staffs. We're not talking about head coaches and what they bring to the table. Just in terms of the talent on the roster, where do you see opportunities where, hey, this football team can go out on the road, play the best of the best, and still come out with double-digit wins? Where's this football team better, Christian?
Well, I think that when you take the big picture look at it, a lot of the players that are going to be impact players are guys that have been on the roster for the last couple of years. So in terms of like an overall personnel aspect, there's not a ton. I mean, obviously the addition of DJ Reed is kind of the huge trademark move that they made this offseason, right? You've got somebody who can at the very least be a solid number 2 cornerback. And if Terrion Arnold doesn't take the jump that some think he will, then now DJ Reed's your number 1, and he's a guy you can feel good about. And he seems to fit Detroit and their style like a glove. So I'm excited to see that. That's one big area. Another big area is the fact that you spent a large portion of the second half of the season without some of your best players. I mean, we're talking about Aiden Hutchinson, who was out starting in week 6. Alex Anzalone missed a huge chunk. Ali McNeil in week 15. A lot of these guys were injured, and now most of them, obviously McNeil's probably going to miss the start of the year. Malcolm Rodriguez maybe out till November. But you talk about guys like Hutchinson And Anzalone, if he gets that new deal worked out and can get him back in the action for training camp, obviously expecting him to play in the regular season. Terrion Arnold with another year of development. Ennis Rakestraw is healthy. You're talking about some pieces in that defense that can really help you out in ways that they couldn't a year ago. So the overall health of the defense is one big area. And then another year of guys like St. Brown. Jameson Williams is obviously in a better spot going into 2025 than he was going into 2024. Jahmyr Gibbs has kind of asserted himself as that number one lead back. Is he going to be somebody who carries the ball 30 times a game? Probably not. And they're doing that to preserve his longevity with that kind of running back by committee. But he's a dynamic threat to score every time he touches the ball. And then Jared Goff with the motivation of having, laid an egg, for lack of a better term, in that divisional round loss. He's going to be fired up and ready to get back at it. A lot of the faces remain the same, but the motivations, the health, things like that are all in a much better place. And now we're talking about a Lions team that's hungry and ready to get it done in 2025.
Exactly. And you hit on a lot of great points. The areas where this team is better is the expectation is that the growth of talented football players will get even better with Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta maybe being even more of a focal point of the offense. And then you get the development of Ennis Rakestraw, Terrion Arnold, and Derek Barnes returning. So there's development that this football team is expected to have with the coaching staff. And when you already got talented players that kind of already understand the basics of the scheme, now you're getting into next level. And so a lot of these guys, the core of this football team is now taking that next step forward. And so it's going to be one of those deals where, yes, how healthy is this football team going to be? How well does Jared Goff play this year? And how much better do Jameson Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs get? Because if they are in that all-pro range and in that now upper echelon where, hey, they're the top 5 at their position, universally recognized and respected, look out. There's not going to be too many defenses that are going to be able to contain. And then really, like you said, if Marcus Davenport and Aiden Hutchinson, if the defensive ends, if the Lions get lucky in terms of their production, if Aiden Hutchinson comes back fully healthy, Marcus Davenport stays around for and plays a large percentage of defensive snaps, now there's opportunities for guys like Ukwu and Ahmed Hassanin to develop. You have an opportunity maybe not to force people into roles they're not comfortable with just yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. And I think that's good. And we got our first glimpse. We got our first glimpse of the Lions at OTAs. Now, it was difficult because, again, we always got to preface it. The offensive line, defensive line, not in pads. Dan Campbell always says, hey, preface it. But he did kind of recognize some players. He recognized Sam Laporta, who was targeted quite a bit. Ennis Rakestraw was a player that really caught the attention of many. Jahmyr Gibbs, like we talked about. So I do think that the biggest winner is Jameson Williams.
Yeah.
I think that he came away with, look, he did the work in the offseason. He got bigger. He got stronger. I think his mental attitude now is, hey, I want to compete to be the number 1 wideout, in this offense. When he missed catches, he definitely is engaged and wants to learn what happened in the route, what happened in terms of the lack of ability to complete deep plays. And then, you saw in the highlight that they showed, he was able to, not even reach 100% full speed and was still able to connect on a deep ball thrown from Jared Goff, beating Ennis Rakestraw. So also too, JMO competing against Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw and DJ Reed at training camp is only going to make him better. So I come away with him being the biggest winner. I think the biggest challenge that you saw was a lot of guys not there, like Broderick Martin and Terrion Arnold not there. It's unfortunate you don't get a chance to see a lot of the guys at the last day of the second week. A lot of the vets like DJ Reader, Panay Sewell, Taylor Decker, not there. So you miss out on some evaluations there. But I think the biggest challenge you get is that, a lot of the guys were not there that you wanted to evaluate. So Broderick Martin, I think still we got a chance to see him working out on the side. So he looks a little bit more athletic and trimmed down. So we'll get a chance to see him. It's interesting now to see what's going on with but I think that now the other aspect that was challenging is, at least the first week, from what we saw football wise, the interior backups, the depth along the offensive line, a little bit concerning in that the pressure that we saw from the defensive line kind of got through and it was a little bit more difficult. So the interior is difficult. And I think, unfortunately, until we see otherwise, you have to say the offensive line is the biggest loser because they lost one of the best all-pro players in football. So It's unfortunate, but that's my list. What did you take away from your readings and your understanding of what occurred at OTAs? I do think that JMO really came away as one of the OTA camp winners, just based on the fact that, hey, Dan Campbell gave him the thumbs up and the praise that, hey, he put in the work and he got a lot better.
Yeah, Jameson Williams, without a doubt, is right up there at the top in terms of winners from the sessions of organized team activities. I think Ennis Rakestraw has generated a lot of buzz, and you're seeing, the tweets coming out about him. I believe it was Ryan Fowler tweeted out the other day that Rakestraw was among the players he was hearing about at the national level in terms of just having conversations with folks around the league. So there's some buzz there for Ennis Rakestraw. And obviously, he'll have an opportunity to compete. And he was also really good in training camp last year. And so you're talking about a guy that if he can stay healthy, there's going to be some momentum for him to go out there and contribute in some capacity in 2025. I think when you talk about losers from OTAs, and it's really hard to, write guys off at this stage because the shoulder pads aren't on yet. But I do think that with Broderick Martin not being an active participant, it's just hard to see where he carves out a role as far as when you've got guys like Reeder and Roy Lopez and Tyleek Williams ahead of him. It's going to be challenging for him to carve out a role when he's pretty much nose tackle exclusive. So that's one guy that I don't leave feeling great about. Another guy that I do feel good about right now is Giovanni Manu. And that's because I'm reading these reports that he's out there with the second team offensive line, playing tackle. They've mentioned potentially sliding him into guard if necessary. And for a guy that was a healthy scratch for most of the year last year, didn't play in any regular season games, the fact that he's part of that second line and is working in his way into potentially being a part of that rotation on game day, I think that's incredibly encouraging for him. And I think another loser from this is that kind of young safety group, because Avonte Maddox, from everything I've seen, Avonte Maddox has looked really, really good over the open portions of practice. And so when you talk about guys like Dan Jackson, Morris Norris, Lauren Strickland, Ian Kennelly, there may only be one spot available for this group of guys. So that's going to be a tough challenge for that group to essentially compete for one spot if Avonte Maddox is going to look as good as he's been. So, some excitement, some things that have us a little bit cautious, but I think the biggest part will be decided in training camp. And with OTAs, some of it is, you can obviously learn a lot about what people's roles might be, but I think a lot of these decisions are made when the pads come on.
Yep. And you just look at it and you say that the opportunity for the Detroit Lions to evaluate everything that's going on is, clear that there's expectations for guys that are going to develop to continue to take strides forward. You have a group of developmental guys, like you said, Gio Manu, Broderick Martin, the young rookies that are taking strides forward. I do think that the biggest winner in terms of now having the biggest opportunity to make an impact is Tate Ratledge. I think that he's going to get a firm chance to be in a competition to be the starting center. And so that's a guy that can have impact right away. You look at it and you say, all right, it stinks that Amon-Ra St. Brown had to have offseason surgery, but it's one of those deals where you expect him to come back. I think that the injuries, that the updates that we got were pretty promising for Amik Robertson, for Tyleek Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jack Campbell. All these players are going to have a full chance to get out there. And hopefully we do get to see Broderick Martin and see him develop and have a chance, because he's a player that I think a lot of people think is on the bubble, and guys like Colby Sorsdahl also have a chance to compete and maybe find a more defined role on this team. But I do think that guys that definitely stood out that you could evaluate, which is good, is the Detroit Lions defensive backs. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about both Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw, Terrion Arnold specifically too. But look, I do expect them to grow. I do expect Terrion Arnold to have the benefit of working with DJ Reed and Amik Robertson and the vets on the team too, to be able to go out there and compete and learn from an Avonte Maddox, learn from the experiences of guys that have been in the league quite a bit of time. And so I think the expectation should be clear that Ennis Rakestraw, you can't just be all about the hype. I like the fact that he wants to prove that his rookie season was a fluke, that, hey, I dealt with something in terms of medical issues that kept me away from the field, or being able to produce more than special teams. I do think that he has a chance to compete for opportunities. And I think that if something does happen to Arnold or DJ Reed, Ennis Rakestraw will get a chance to compete and learn. So he's going to have a good training camp. Terrion Arnold, I think, needs to take that step forward to be more consistent and be able to take that next step as a defensive back, which probably means in the area of continuing to develop as a tackler, continuing his great play as a press man corner. And really, in the end, it's got to be more impactful plays. And I think that can happen. More plays that are game-changing plays. When you're drafted in the first round, there's got to be a game-changing element to your game. And the first year, the game-changing element was the flags that went against the team. But he got better at it. And that's something that you can respect the Detroit Lions for throwing him into the fire, having a chance for him to learn and develop, do a lot of different things that a young player is not typically used to at that pace. And then going up against the best of the best in the division and in the National Football League definitely gives you a quick lesson in education. And so I do think he put in the work. I do think that he also wants to continue to grow and develop. What are you expecting from Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw? Young defensive backs that I think are going to benefit from the other members of the roster.
Yeah, you need him to compete, and you need him to be capable of going out there and playing significant snaps from day one of the 2025 season. I mean, like, we watched Arnold, like, up close kind of go through the struggles that most rookies do go through. And I think that in some points, the Lions have been kind of spoiled because of the way that their first-round picks have acclimated. When you talk about Penei Sewell coming in and being an instant game changer, Aiden Hutchinson and Jahmyr Gibbs just going through it and kind of being ready to go right away. And so Arnold wasn't necessarily ready to go in terms of being a press man corner who's going to go up against the best of the best every single snap. But the great thing about Terrion Arnold is his mindset. I've said from day one, I think he's wired right. And I think that goes such a long way when you're playing the cornerback position, because you are going to get beat. You're going to get penalized. We see it every Sunday. There's always questionable. Is it not pass interference? You're going to see that, and you've got to be able to respond in the correct manner. And I do think that Terrion Arnold showed that throughout the year last year. And that's why I'm still pretty bullish on Terrion Arnold in terms of his long-term ability to be a top corner in the NFL. Is it going to be this year where he just magically ascends to that top 5 level? No, but I think he can start to show some strides. I think he can, he didn't have an interception last year. Let's see him pick off a couple passes. Let's see him go make a big play on a 4th down and break up a pass. Like, just these little moments that he can have and start to stack up to the point where when you're having this conversation a year from now, 2 years from now, you feel really, really good about where he's at. I think growth is the biggest thing with him. I think with Rakestraw, it's durability. It's him going out there and proving not just to everybody else, but to himself that he can do it, because his opportunities were so limited last year. So I think they're both kind of at different stages, but I think the universal theme is growth. And I need to see growth from both of those guys, and I'm pretty confident that they can do it just based on how they're wired, and with Rakestraw, how he was in training camp, and then with Arnold, that growth he started to show at the end of the year last year.
And then some of the teammates did get a chance to speak on Terrion Arnold and what he's been able to do. He's been giving DJ Reed and Avonte Maddox a run for their money, kind of talking to them and discussing with them what he sees on film. And, DJ Reed said, hey, I caught some, he expressed some things that he saw on film that I could do better. And I'm actually going to take it and take it in stride and understand that, he's actually right. There's some things I can do better to be around the football better. And that's a goal that DJ Reed told Lions on SI. He also wants to have more interceptions. You can check out the feature that we did on DJ Reed on Lions on SI. But I do think that Terrion Arnold is a player that, at least in terms of the way he thinks through the game, his ability to watch film and grow and develop, I think there's something there in regards to the belief that, in your second year, you take big strides and you get better. You get the most better you get from one offseason to the next is your second year in the NFL. So Terrion Arnold's catching the attention of his teammates. I think that bodes well. And I think that the question then becomes, knowing that Terrion Arnold is, a first-round pick, good player, do you think going into the year he's the number 1 cornerback?
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing with Terrion Arnold is his confidence is impressive. And I think that might be a big reason why he's already starting to catch the eye of his teammates, because there's nothing he's afraid. Like, he doesn't ever play scared. He's just not afraid. He's bought in completely to that physical style. And yes, it did lead to some penalties early on when he was being too handsy, but I think he's starting to figure out that niche area of physicality versus giving space. so that you're not constantly getting penalty flags. And I do think that he has cornerback one potential this year. I think right now DJ Reed is that guy. I think right now, if you're putting names on the depth chart right now, DJ Reed is cornerback one. But I would not be surprised if Terrion Arnold has a good training camp. Now that's a discussion to be had. And then now Arnold is the guy that's in the mix to get the top options based on matchup, based on who they're playing, things of that nature. So I do think that he has CB1 potential. I'm just not quite there yet in terms of him being that guy. Now, is this going to be something that is an open competition? Yeah, because everything that the Lions do have, I'd say outside of starting quarterback, you can make an argument that starting quarterback and Aiden Hutchinson as the top defensive end, I think you can make an argument that every single position in some way or another is in a way up for grabs. But I wouldn't say right now that I'm ready to put Terrion Arnold ahead of DJ Reed.
Okay. And it was fun to get a chance to speak to Reed after practice on Thursday. I thought that he was very open-minded and willing to address the questions directly. And I think that him playing in New York definitely teaches you about media spotlight and catching flack for being on a team that kind of struggled. So he understands the complexity of playing in a major media market and with a lot of expectations and also dealing with some adversity. And I think that something that he said that just really caught my attention is that players are coming in and they're saying openly that, yeah, the intense practices are definitely one in which it's noticeably different than maybe across the league, but the accountability that everybody has, from the equipment managers to medical training personnel to everybody involved in the organization, has accountability. And DJ Reed noticed it right away. And he said that, look, that he's allowed to have fun when need be, but the coaching staff locks in and the players lock in. There's a good balance of, hey, we're allowed to have fun. We're allowed to express ourselves on social media, share what we need to share. But at the same time, when it's time to lock in and get to work on the notes and review film and get after it and learn and grow and hold each other accountable, that's what Dan Campbell indicated, is that he wants this team to hold themselves accountable, that have the standard and don't let anybody or anything let the standard fall. And he said he called it a football utopia. He told his family, told his sister, this is the most fun I'm having playing football. And I do think that's, again, a reminder and a credit that when you have a lot of former players that are now coaches, they understand what players are looking for. They want an environment where they can feel comfortable, where they can be themselves, but also when it's time to lock in and understand coaching, if the Lions players make a mistake, they know about it. So to me, the balance is perfect in regards to working hard, but also having a good time. So it was great to see that DJ Reed said playing for the Lions is football utopia, which means best of the best. Like, this is the prime spot to be playing National Football League football.
Yeah, and I do think that he's got some merit to that. And I think you've heard a lot of players say things of that similar style in recent years since Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes took over. I mean, look, they take care of their guys. They've set that precedent that they take care of their guys. And you talk about the Sewell extension, the Goff extension, the St. Brown extension, things of that nature, like the Kirby Joseph extension. They take care of their guys, and I think that builds confidence within players that come into the organization. It's like, hey, first of all, a guy like Reed coming in free agency, the Lions have demonstrated how much they want him based on the financial value of his contract, right? And so he comes in and he knows he's wanted there. He knows that they have a vision for him, and he knows that he has to just do what he's done throughout his career. And the Lions will see value in that, because when you make the 3-year commitment that they made to him based on what he's done previously, it's exciting to think about going into a new home with a team with winning aspirations, and you just have to do what you do best. And so, yeah, absolutely, I can definitely see where he's coming from in that aspect. And I would like to see what DJ Reed can bring to the table as far as in this style of play. I think that he is very physical. He's undersized, but he plays much bigger than he is. And for that reason, I think DJ Reed is going to be a seamless fit for the Lions.
Exactly. Great way to put it. Seamless fit, natural fit for a guy that I think has attachments here and wants the Lions to do some great things. And I think a good player. I think he's going to end up hopefully getting some interceptions and welcoming him to town. I think is going to be great. I think he might end up being an upgrade over Carlton Davis. Let's hope that that's the case, because the Lions made a nice, healthy financial commitment to him. All right, one last thing, a couple things of news and notes to clean up and to discuss. Look, Frank Ragnow, I thought was given the proper respect, a talented center, former first-round pick. It's funny in the videos, they kind of wiped away Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia as if they were never there, but that's good. I get it. They're not going to highlight the general manager that actually selected him that's no longer here, but I thought that's funny. It's a little nugget of observation there that you get to see is that for a player that was drafted from a former regime, Bob Quinn did, have an eye for offensive line talent. So you do give him credit for that. But Frank Ragnow, I thought, was given the proper respect by the organization, his former teammates. Look, Dan Campbell said what he had to say in regards to, I do not think, and I don't think many people thought that his contract, if he may or may not have been unhappy, would have been the reason he would have retired. But everybody looks at their contract and they look at it compared to everybody else. It's just a normal part of operating procedures, human nature, that, if I'm making this, how much is somebody else making? And that should be a factor. Like, okay, I'm set. How much do I have in the bank? How much would I make this year? Could I get more from the organization? Dan said, yeah, that would have, if Frank would have expressed a desire to want more, I think they would have probably acquiesced and been able to find a way to work with Frank Ragnow. But naturally speaking, you look around and you go, man, I signed a contract. And then within a couple of years, the market doubles. You're like, holy cow, I signed it too early, or I didn't get as much value out of being the best signed that others are getting, where others are now nearly making 20 million at the position. That's double what you're making. So normally speaking, I don't have a problem with players that look at that and wonder about the market. You always want to be paid what you think is fair. And so for Frank Ragnow, I think his legacy will be of grit and toughness, as it should be. And the Lions fans definitely appreciated it by going to his charity and donating, whether it be $7 or 70 cents or $77. His organization raised $10,000 to $11,000 in 24 hours. So keep going. You can find it on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. The foundation thanked us for writing the story. And yeah, that's easy. It's an easy decision to highlight the great work that Frank Ragnow does, working with grieving families and children and providing the understanding that being outdoors is just so good for you. It could be a source of therapeutic help for kids. And you never want to dismiss or not highlight someone working in the community and doing great things for kids. So that was easy. So no problem. You're welcome. We have no problem highlighting that. And the fans in Detroit definitely showed what the appreciation is for Frank Ragnow. But, I do think that a couple of superlatives kind of started throwing out there. I do not think he's a Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, not enough recognition nationally to kind of put him in terms of the Yellow Jacket Club. But I do think in terms of the respect level, you can have a debate about pride of the Lions, but I do think that him being gritty, playing for the time that he did, I do think that he left an imprint on the organization. But you could have a debate that, okay, that entire, this Dan Campbell class of players, working with Brad Holmes, there might not be enough room to support like 40 players that, if they stay here a long time, you probably could get 2-3 dozen players that end up being part of Pride of the Lions from this group, because of just how much talent has been brought here. But I think it's safe to say Pride of the Lions. I think that celebrating Frank Ragnow would not be a bad thing in a couple years.
I think, like, initial recency bias, my mind tells me yes. I do think that he's deserving. I mean, he was one of the best in the league at his position for, pretty much the duration of his career. I mean, he's talking about 4 Pro Bowls, 3 times he was second team All-Pro, and I believe 2 of those were behind Jason Kelce, who was probably the next center with the best chance of making the Hall of Fame. I don't think Ragnow, I mean, the unfortunate part of his retirement is he's retiring before he's 30 years old. I mean, injury, if there were no injuries, he's probably got another, 5-6 years if he didn't have all these injuries lined up. And at that point, you can really start to build a resume that is fitting of the Hall of Fame. And so I don't think he gets in there, but I think in an era of Lions football that is defined by, number one, the rebuild starting with the revitalization of the offensive line, and Frank Ragnow was such a huge part of that. Like, I think Ragnow is a lock for the Pride of the Lions. I think that when you talk about, what do you think of when you think of this Lions team? You think of the offense, and more specifically, you think of the offensive line. And that was kind of like the first group of players to be considered among the league's best when this whole rebuild got started. So I think that Ragnow kind of defines that group, and I think he kind of defines this era of Lions football with his toughness, his willingness to play through injury, the fact that they had to tell him he wasn't playing. It was never an issue of, do you think you can play? Because when you ask Annette, the answer is always going to be yes. And for that reason, I think he definitely embodies what it should be what it should take to get into the pride of the Lions for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And all credit and respect for Frank Ragnow for making the decision. But now the Lions, like Dan Campbell said, train keeps on rolling. And the football team now has a big, big task of evaluating who should be the starting center. And we'll talk about that as we lead into future podcasts and the evaluations that are going to take place at training camp. But one last bit of news and notes and nuggets. We came across, you and I, as we like to read all the content out there and be as much knowledgeable as possible regarding the Detroit Lions. And one of the things we're always looking at via the various platforms and our numbers and calculations, the salary cap. And because when, to tie it all together, when you want to bring in a player like Jaire Alexander, it might cost you over $15 million to maybe be in the conversation. The Lions have it this year, but there's a dilemma. And as the latest, the 69th, 70th round of the Trey Hendrickson talks hit the internet this last couple of weeks, I thought that was funny that they're still trying to bring up, analysts are still discussing avenues for teams to trade for Trey Hendrickson. Until the deal gets done, I see why that happens. But you look at it and you say the salary cap has to play a factor in the decisions that the Detroit Lions make. So you look at it and you say, all right, what are the factors that the Lions need to be able to handle the opportunities to grow and add talent and look for rainy day and maybe wait until something happens or when the deadline happens if you want to add a marquee player. But in hitting that tab that says, we clearly understand 2025, but when you hit the 2026 tab, you're like, the numbers turn differently. And the Detroit Lions are massively over the cap next year. And we looked at it. You looked at it as well. Fill us in. It's not the best news to end on, but you look at it and you say, oh boy, General Manager Brad Holmes and the Lions got work to do. There's going to be some players that are going to be having, look, when a player renegotiates, they don't take less money. It's just reworked differently in how they get it. It's just, hey, the Lions can generate a lot of cap space next year by renegotiating Taylor Decker and Jared Goff, which most likely could happen, or Penesu or others. But as of now, factually, the Lions have a massive salary cap problem next year. What's the deal?
Well, when you look at the over the cap page, right, they've got the total team salary cap. And obviously right now the cap number for the 2026 season is an estimation. And so the exact number of them, what they're exactly going to be, remains to be seen because that number will come out next off season. But right now, over the cap has the estimation of $295 million being the flat salary cap number for the NFL. And right now, the Lions are just under $55 million over that in terms of their current cap commitments for the 2026 season. Now, there are a couple of interesting things about this. The first being that Frank Ragnow is still listed on the page as counting against the cap. And obviously we talked about this last week when he retired. There should be around $12.7 or $12.75 million in savings that they get. Still, that doesn't do a whole lot. It takes you from $54 million to $42 million. And I think the biggest thing for the Lions is they need to be really, really wise on how they spend their money for the remainder of the 2024 season. Because right now they have about $40 million in cap space. And what they can do is they can roll that money over into 2026, and then you start to shrink that number as far as being whatever 55 million over the cap. But if you roll over 40 million, now it's 15 million, and then you can start to play around with restructures, and you look at some of the cap savings that you can get by potentially releasing a player or two. I do think that there are some elements to where you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. You could just restructure some of these contracts and keep that core in place. Obviously, they're not going to cut Jared Goff. He's got about $70 million in dead cap that they would take on if that were to be the case. So they're not obviously going to do that, but you can start to look at some of these restructures. But I think the big thing, and they have themselves a chance to do themselves a huge favor, roll some of that money over. Roll it over into 2026 because you've got $40 million just sitting here. Unless you're going to go make a move for some big star, you're going to do yourselves a whole lot more favors by taking a good chunk of that money into 2026 with you, so you can start to mitigate that situation that you're currently in with the salary cap. Again, we've got a long way to go before 2026, but when you start to think about Hutchinson and JMO and Jahmyr Gibbs a couple years down the line, and Branch and Laporta, this situation is not getting any easier. So you're going to have to start to be really, really smart with your financial decisions. And I think they do themselves a whole lot of favors by taking a good portion of the $40 million they've got left over into 2026.
Yeah, saving. That's not my favorite word in terms of general managership. Listen, you look like a wise, rational young person. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to spend it all. I want Hendrickson, Jaire. I want it all. But one of the blessings is that there's an opportunity too if the salary cap goes up $20 million more. So you basically get a free player. So it's a great opportunity to hopefully manage the cap. But right now, factually, they're over the cap. But in terms of the ability, I think you've reflected that in your story that they can manage it and solve the problem. I know you alerted people to the problem, but now there's also a solution that they can work through. So in essence, the cap is real, but it's something that you can push down the road with void years, with taking bonuses and giving it up front and finagling it in a way. And sometimes there's tough decisions with cuts. Sometimes there's tough decisions with who's getting renegotiated and all those kind of things. And sometimes it's just, hey, a player gets let go and you don't have that allocation anymore on the books. But the Lions have done a good job. Credit to them. I think it's fair to say that, yeah, the cap is going to become an issue in the coming years, but one in which we still have confidence today that they're able to manage it. But we're going to stay on it at Lions on SI as we regularly look at dead cap, the salary cap, and all things Detroit Lions. What break? 5-6 weeks off. Yeah, maybe the flow of information won't be as frenetic, but we're still going to pump out podcasts, talk about the Lions. So much to talk about in regards to some evergreen content that we like as well, rankings, all the fun stuff, talking about football. It's a fun gig, and that's why Christian and I like firing it up and talking about the Detroit Lions. So make sure you stay with Detroit Lions on SI. Stay with the YouTube channel as well as we continue to pump out videos and create content full-time surrounding the Detroit Lions. Lions on SI's YouTube page. Hit that notification bell so you get all the content right when it comes out, our reactions to things and our thoughts and our weekly podcasts that are dedicated to the Detroit Lions. Good recording, Christian. Look forward to talking either later this week or next week, but we're going to keep the train rolling as well, talking about the Detroit Lions. This has been the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast.